Take a minute and think about the last time you had a big decision to make in your life, a somewhat risky decision. Maybe it was planned or possibly a completely unplanned situation that you were suddenly thrown into. You probably experienced a cold sweat, a panic, an uneasy feeling in your stomach like you've just been punched. What did you do? How did you tackle it to choose the right path? Is there even such a thing as the right path? Were you brave or did you shy away? Today we're talking about the topic of risk. More specifically, we're answering one of your questions about risk. We've had loads of feedback since starting this podcast and love receiving your input and questions. We read them all. So before we get into it, if you want to get involved, head over to our Twitter, Instagram and website and ask away. I've put all of the links in the show notes below. Okay, so today's question is from Anna Robinson and it says, how do you have the courage to take risks in your life? Leaving a stable, successful career to travel and start your own ventures, nearing your 30s is difficult and no doubt a scary decision to make. So I'm going to throw that one over to you, Luce. How do you have the courage to take risks in your life?
Okay, that's a really, really nice question. So thank you, Anna, for sharing that with us. Okay, so let's break down what she said then. So if we look at risk in the round, I think that there's a bit of a risk timeline. So from the moment someone says something that's potentially risky to you, and you're in sort of that first state, you're in the first phase of the risk, I think that you are like immediately discard it. You have that awful feeling in your stomach, as you said.
Yeah.
Every time you think about it, it's like someone's just jumped out on you. Do you know what I mean? That like real heightened sense of like fright when you think about something. It might be when you let your mind wander to leaving your job and handing in your notice and, oh my God, what's your boss going to say? I know me certainly can get really hot and really not hot, but like in a hot state, het up is about it. But then I think like if you allow yourself to kind of go through the motions of thinking about it, maybe talking it through with people, doing a bit of reading up in any direction that might help you, then finally you can sort of reposition how you perceive that risk, and it all of a sudden doesn't become so frightening. So I think about some of the jobs that I've had to leave, well, not had to leave, but I have left in pursuit of something else. All of them really have been a risk. So like my first job, I left that to step into a sales role. And I remember my first boss, Bill, putting my CV in the bin. And it was a really difficult resignation.
Oh, really?
And then I
remember that was a tough one.
Yeah.
I didn't know he just put your CV in the bin.
Yeah, rolled it up in a ball and threw it in the bin. I was like, you have to accept this by law, and then, so like there's been quite a few. My risks that I think about have definitely been like leaving a job. But it could be, leaving your partner. Yeah, I suppose going travelling is a little bit different for me because the risk originally was leaving social chain. That was the bigger risk because then I'd already been self-employed. So then by the time we'd both decided to go travelling, I feel like it wasn't so much of a risk then because we kind of defined everything. Yeah,
but from that initial panic state when you think about, or your mind wanders to thinking about it, or you hear about something, what happens in that process that you just said, like time ticks and then you kind of like rationalize it? What happens, do you think, for you?
Well, if you allow yourself to like let your mind wander, I think one of my really good friends, Kelly, says like if you put something out into the universe, then it will happen because you have a way of getting yourself there. So I feel like if you say, actually I really want a promotion, I need to get out of this relationship, I want to sell my house and go traveling or whatever, I think if you're not irrational and you follow that pursuit, even if it feels terrifying now. It won't at the end of the day. So I guess my advice to anybody if they're in that really hot state of risk, feeling terrified of the risk, just sort of sit with it for a bit. I think time also plays a big part in reflecting back on the situation. So I think, and it kind of helps you out in the situation. So I was saying to you, wasn't I, a couple of days ago, I had an email that was like, I was really annoyed about it, and I just sat on it for a couple of days, and yesterday I was able to respond in it in a much better way, and then the outcome for myself and that other person is completely different. So I do think time and a little bit of like looking inwardly helps you change your perception, maybe show a bit of compassion because I feel like a lot of the risky things, yes, sometimes it's about money, but also it's about how you're going to be perceived or how people are going to come back at you. I think that's definitely a big thing for me. If I'm terrified about something, it's usually because it's got somebody else involved in it. Because I'm an absolute pussy.
Right.
So yeah, do you know what I mean? So if you can just like come down and from being in that real het up state, then you can manage the situation better.
Time and like taking time to just rationalize it, think about it, rather than you don't have to make a decision immediately.
Oh yeah, definitely. Also, like another thing that I always, and I say this to you all the time, sometimes you have to make a decision to make a decision. So if you're unhappy in your job and you think, do you know what, I'm going to decide tonight on Sunday night, I'm going to stay here for another month or another year because it's going to look good on my CV or whatever. I mean, I'd never recommend that, but I'm going to stay here for another year. And then if you walk into work on that Monday morning, having made that decision in your own mind, and you then realise there is no fucking way I can stay here another year, you have to go. Do you know what I mean?
Right, okay.
So I feel like positioning things in your head and making your mind up helps you solidify those decisions. Sometimes I just think you have to make a decision. What's your favourite quote at the moment? Decide and move on. What is it you keep saying?
I don't know.
Yeah, you do. You read it the other day.
What, make a decision and move on?
Yeah, but it's not that.
Well, it's not a quote, but that's
just decide and go.
Keep front of mind. Yeah, well, the reason you're bringing that up is because you'll never actually. One thing to keep in mind with all of this, if you've got a decision and you see it's risky, and it's like, do I do it or not? Well, you'll never know the other side of it. So whatever you do, you will never know how good or bad the other side was. So as you said, then you could be kind of fearful about doing it or fearful about not doing something. Well, actually, if you understand that, you're not going to know either way what would have been, then there's no point kind of thinking about it, stressing about it.
Yeah, but also I think people forget that it's not black and white. Like, X doesn't always equal Y.
Wow, yeah, that's true.
If you decide to go along one route, then that opens up doors in so many other directions that you could have taken. Everything cause and effect, everything has an impact on something. So you were using the example the other day about in football, if a manager decides to do one thing and someone scores, then the manager is praised. But if they don't score, then the manager is berated. But it's the same decision. It's like the outcome that is the result rather than the decision. However, if that manager chose to do something different, then
you don't know what would have happened.
You don't know what would have happened. Do you
what you're picking out there is the difference between the decision and the output. Yeah. It's easy to think that if I choose this route, then it leads to that. And if I choose the other route, it will lead to something else.
But it won't.
But all of it is unknown.
Yeah,
exactly. So you can't properly plan ahead. There's always that element of uncertainty in even no matter what sort of direction you take, because you never know what experiences and things you're going to have with it. So I agree. I totally agree with you. It's not as black and white, and it's not final. Because my biggest thing with this, in terms of if we're looking at risk and how do we take risks, this is just about I think the process you said there in taking your time, what you're really doing is just reframing the situation. I'm always fascinated by, whenever I speak to anyone, and the interviews I've done for this podcast, to be fair, how different people have different thoughts and approaches to what could be a similar situation. So someone could see something as really, really risky. The same situation, another person could have reframed it completely different and don't see it as risk at all, could see it as a risk-free option. So I'm quite interested by how people kind of approach that. And I think a good question to ask yourself, if you're sort of facing one of these, potential pathways right now, is what is the worst that can happen? Yeah,
that is definitely something that, going back to, you said, how have you dealt with things like that? I guess if we think about travel or going self-employed, two things: bloody backing yourself. Like I will openly say, if things go tits up, I'm quite confident I could go and get employed again in some industry, doing anything, not anything, but like, it could be stepping back into Sainsbury's. It could be there is.
But why is that though? Why are you confident that you could get employed?
Because that's what I've told myself.
Yeah. Okay.
No one's told me that. And that, I could have a bloody shock, but that's a bit of,
but I think
telling yourself over and over that, I think because I've left the last couple of jobs in my own control, I think maybe that's why I feel quite confident that I could go and get self-employed. But I think that is how I think about it. Now, just by saying that, it helps me decide to take risks. Do you know what I mean? Because if
absolutely.
I didn't think that, it doesn't matter really whether I am employable or not. What are you laughing at me for? It doesn't matter if you're actually employable or not. It's just how you think about it. You might think, "Oh, what a bloody pillow."
And what I think you're getting at there is that, like, you as the person are your best asset. You're like, because you know that you still have,
still got
stuff
it
to offer. Well, and anyone else and everyone does though.
Really joking.
But that's the thing. It's like, what's the worst that can happen? Because if things go wrong, the other question I ask myself is, how long would it take me to get back to where I am today? And like you said, if you know that you can actually be employable because you value yourself, you learn, you take in knowledge, and you have a whole subset of skills, then you can get back quite quickly. So that kind of,
I think that's what I mean. But my overriding point is, it doesn't actually matter whether I could step into a job tomorrow or not. What matters is that I think that way. Therefore, it unlocks decisions that I wouldn't be able to make if I was terrified of not being able to live, So.
And what about if things go wrong then? So for someone that's got a really risky decision and they've decided to take that risk, they decided to go with it, they've probably weighed it up, rationalized it, and they went with it, but things aren't going as planned.
Okay, so I've got quite a good example for this. So we did decide to take a financial risk in an investment, and it turned out to be a little bit more trickier than we anticipated, which meant that, from a financial point of view, it was a little bit tougher. Not the toughest, but it was tough. And I think that continuing to have a clear mind and a wider outlook on the situation, rather than inwardly looking at your bank account thinking, oh, right, shit, looking at the wider picture, maintaining your relationships, not getting too caught in a downward spiral, just allows you to manage how you're feeling in the day. But also remember that you're not going to stay in that place forever. If you're positive and you're putting your one foot in front of the other, you are going to move away from that. And then that will give you such a good benchmark around where you don't want to go back to, or it will make you appreciate things a lot more. So I think
you'll learn
a little bit of pain actually is really good. Is really, really good in terms of how you move forward and progress.
Yeah. No, I totally agree, because you'll be learning. You're learning either way.
Yeah.
And I think when you're faced with this decision and you see it as a big risk, because I guess it's because of our nature as like humans, we have this tendency to preserve ourselves. Of course, it's like, what's the safest option for me? So jumping into uncertainty feels wrong from like a primal instincts point of view. And so we have this tendency to like avoid failure. I think that's what a lot of the time people who don't see themselves as risk takers, or they don't take these risks, what they're actually trying to do is avoid failure. But as we've already said, you can't plan on either outcome anyway. So you don't even know if it's going to end in failure. You don't even know if it's got more chance of ending in failure, because you actually don't know. And if you reframe it like you just said then, that you learn from everything anyway, and we already know from our conversations on previous episodes that you actually learn most from your failure, but all of a sudden you're really reframing the topic of risk and seeing that decision that you saw as probably way outside your comfort zone actually could come with a hell of a lot of benefits, even if it goes wrong.
Yeah, I completely agree. So but I do think, some people, it's like their innate behavior to avoid risk. It's that like fight or flight thing. But I do think there's a lot to be said for going with your gut instinct. Like, I think about maybe two of the companies that I've worked for. I've known in that interview that my gut is that this isn't right for me, yet I've still gone for it. And I think maybe that was a bad decision, but then I've learned a lot from those situations. So I think, listening to your gut is a massive, massive thing to consider, because generally, as I've said before, if you're thinking something now, then it will probably happen. I think like your intuition is massive. But regardless, if it all goes tits up, if it turns out to be the worst job, the worst relationship, the worst house you've ever bought, the worst place you ever traveled to, you then know,
Yeah.
So I think risk, give it time, back yourself, go with your gut, try and reposition it to not be such a terrifying thing. Because I also think if you are terrified of something, then maybe it's something you should do to get yourself out of your comfort zone. I remember going to Social Chain, or when I first met Social Chain, and the position on the table was massive for me. And I was speaking to everybody like, I'm so terrified about taking this role, but that's why I took it. Because I think like now look at all of those things and experiences and people that I've met, like how fucking brilliant, sorry, excuse my language, but how brilliant. So anybody, if you're out there now thinking, oh God, I'm not sure, just do it.